Hi everyone! Today we're going to be working on a printmaking method called transfer. So we will be using gel medium. Today we're using Mod Podge, some printed images. It's very important that these are from an inkjet printer, not a laser printer. We'll talk about that in a little bit, and a paintbrush. So before we get started, there's a few things to note about our photos that is very important to think about before we jump into our project. So the first thing is, as you can see, the photos that I have here are very high contrast. You can print photos in color to use for this method, but sometimes it does have a bit of an antique look just because of the way it transfers. So the best images that we can use are very high contrast, very clean looking with nice sharp lines. That's going to get us the most crisp image. Another thing that's very important to note is that when we print our images, if we want them to transfer just as they appear here, you have to be sure to mirror the image before you print it. So for example, this image actually appeared this way on my computer, and I had to reverse the image so that when I transfer it, it prints the accurate way. Now that we've gotten a few of those tips and tricks out of the way, let's get started. So I have already created the collage that I'm going to be using for our transfer method today. So this is a collage that mainly consists of acrylic paint, gel medium, some old paper bags here for some nice texture, and some old newspaper cutouts. And if you've been following along with the lesson plan that we previously talked about, you'll see that this collage perfectly aligns with what we're aiming to create as our final artistic piece. I've created some details here that can express my background, culture, and heritage, and I'm also going to include some specific transfers of places that are meaningful in that regard as well. I've coated this entire work with that gel medium, so Mod Podge. That's going to give us the best texture and background to apply our transfers onto. Once that gel medium layer has dried, it's time to start our transfers. So I'm first going to start my transfer process by working on my composition. So I want to keep in mind the layout that I would like to include. I want to include all of my elements and figure out exactly how they're going to go before I commit to using my gel medium again. To do this, I'm going to lay them down using the reverse of the image. So I'm flipping these over and lining them up exactly where I want them on my canvas. You can see that I have a layered image here. So this actually means that I'm going to do this transfer in a two-step process. I'm going to work in my base layer of transfers here, so I'll be transferring my cityscape as well as my bridge. And then once I remove these transfers, I'll be adding on my last layer. Now that I've committed to my layout, I can start beginning my transfer process. So I'm going to remove the first picture that I want to lay down, and I'm going to use my gel medium in a thick coat to place exactly where my first photo transfer is going to be. So you can see that you can be a little messy with this. You can be a little generous. You can kind of just smear that on, and once this has that nice coat to it, I'm going to take my first image, which I've already trimmed down. So you can see that I've cut out some of that excess paper. That's going to make it easier for me in the long run, and you'll see why later. So once I have my gel medium, my Mod Podge coating here, I'm going to lay this down exactly where I want this. So you can see that I do have some hanging off the edge here. That's fine. I'm going to leave this hanging off until way later in our process. Now that my first image transfer is completely adhered, I'm going to get ready to stick down my next image transfer. Now don't forget, this is because they are on the same base layer, so I'm going to repeat the same process on this side as I did the other side. Now I'm going to lay this down exactly where I want it. So I deliberately trimmed this side of the image so I wouldn't have to trim off excess later, so I know this lines up exactly on the edge of my canvas here. I want to be mindful of where I want my bridge to attach to my land here. And I'm going to carefully stick this down where I want the image to appear on my canvas. Now I'm going to take some extra time to really rub this down and make sure I am getting rid of all the air bubbles that are underneath my artwork. For this part of our transfer, we want to be a little gentle because our paper is now wet, so it is a bit delicate. I find that using my finger has worked best in the process. As I'm going, I'm also being very careful to make sure that I don't rub gel medium on top of my picture here. I want to keep this paper backed as much as I can without smushing this onto places that it shouldn't be. I feel that this one is rubbed down very well. I've gotten most of my air bubbles out, so I think this guy is okay on this side. Now that all of my air bubbles have been removed and I'm comfortable with how well these are stuck down, I'm going to let this dry for at least 6 hours. This takes a little patience. So now that our paper is completely dry, it is time for the last step to reveal our photo transfers. The last material you're going to need is a kitchen sponge and some water. So I'm going to reveal each one of these transfers one at a time. So the first thing I'm going to do is dip my sponge into the water and wet my first transfer. You don't want to use too much water, but you want to use enough to saturate your paper. So I'm going to allow this to soak in for a minute until I can start to see my image coming through. Now that it's wet, I'm just going to soak up that excess water and let it kind of sit for just a minute. Once all of that water has absorbed into my paper here, you can see a clear difference. This paper is much more transparent now that it has the water on it. Now it's time to get this paper layer off. So I'm going to use my sponge and work in small circles to start to scrape away this top paper layer. And you can kind of see that as I'm going, it's starting to reveal my background underneath. So now that I've taken off that entire layer of paper, you can see my background is coming through really nicely. I do still need to get some of these smaller bits of paper. You'll find that this part is a little bit messy, but it's really coming through very nicely. It also has a distressed look, which works very well with the collage background. So now it's time to repeat that whole process with my image transfer on the right side. Now to clean up my area and my artwork, I'm going to take some damp paper towels and just wipe everything down. Once our new coating of Mod Podge has dried, now we can add in more layers. Remember earlier when I mentioned I wanted to add in one more layer of my tree? I'm going to save that for next time, just for the sake of time in this video. But what else can you add with new layers? What can you incorporate? What can you suggest through layering and through building techniques Don't forget, you can also add some more acrylic on top of this. You don't just need to build in photo transfers.